going to begin reading at verse 30, and I'm going to read two stories that you probably know very well. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, beginning in verse 30. And I'm going to be reading from the New American Standard Version of the Bible, and you please follow along in the translation that you have with you today. Mark says that the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while." For there were many people coming and going. Notice this, you've been there before, Mark says, and they did not even have time to eat. You ever had a time like that in your life? You've been busy, you've been here, you've been there. Mark says it had been like that in the life of the disciples. And so they went away, verse 32 says, in a boat to a secluded place by themselves. They need to rest. But, verse 33, but the people saw them going, and many recognized them and ran there together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of them. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. And when it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate, and it's already quite late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy something to eat." But Jesus answered them and said, "You give them something to eat." And they said back to Jesus, "Well, shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat?" In other words, we haven't got enough money to feed this bunch. And Jesus said to them, verse 38, "How many loaves do you have? Go look." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And he commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass. And they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before the people, and he divided up the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate. How much did they eat? Until they were satisfied, verse 42 says. And they picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces and also of the fish. And there were 5,000 men there that day who ate the loaves. And remember, in the New Testament, a loaf is just like a little piece of flatbread, almost like what we would call pita bread. So we're not talking about big loaves of bread. We're talking about just 5 little small pieces of flatbread. That fed 5,000 men, not to mention the women and the children. And notice the next verse. Notice the first word in the next verse. Verse 45 says, immediately. One story right on top of the other. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowd away. And after bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray. And when it was evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. And seeing them, Jesus is on the mountain there in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, seeing them strain at the oars, verse 48 says, for the wind was against them. At about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and he intended, New American Standard says, to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost and cried out, for they saw him and they were terrified. But immediately he spoke with them and said to them, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished. Utterly astonished. For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. I've told you this before. When you read the Gospels, you have to remember that the stories in the Gospels are not just accidentally packed one on top of the other in any kind of haphazard order. When you read a story in the Gospels, you also have to read the stories before that story and after that story to see if there is a connection between the stories as they are told, a connection that can teach a bigger lesson. And there's no doubt that the two stories that we just read are connected. If you look in the middle, chapter 6, verse 45, that middle verse between the two stories, that is a clear linking verse that ought to automatically just make us think, boy, I bet these two stories go together, because chapter 6, verse 45 says, immediately. So there's no doubt that these two stories, the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on the water, are supposed to be read together. So that hint should get us thinking about these two stories as one. But there's a problem here. The problem is that we know both of these stories so well that it's really difficult for us to think about them as one story. Now, I mean, think about it. If I said to you, let's talk about the feeding of the 5,000, and I asked you, well, how many loaves did they have? I mean, you don't even have to look back to the passage. You know there were how many? 5. And how many fish? Yeah, we always talk about 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and I've never understood whether or not we should say 2 fish or 2 fishes. Whichever way you want to do it is fine. And how many leftovers were there? 12 baskets. 1 for each of the... I think that's right. So that's one story. We know that story. We know the details of that story. And so when we think about that story, we tend to think about it by ourselves. And then we know the other story just as well. We know that the disciples were in the Sea of Galilee, and we know that particular body of water is very prone to storms. And there's 2 stories, in fact, in the Gospels about a stormy night on the Sea of Galilee. And we know that the disciples were rowing, and we know that it was late. It says that Jesus came to them in the 4th watch of the night. In the Roman era, the 4th watch was from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So it is late at night. In fact, it's early in the morning, and they're still trying to get to the other side. The wind is blowing against them, and we know that Jesus comes walking on the water, and they're so afraid they don't know what's happening. I mean, because you just don't see people walk on the water every night when you're out on a dark lake in a rowboat by yourself with no protection and no cannon, nothing, and here comes somebody walking on the water. My goodness. But that, in our minds, there's one story, the feeding of the 5,000. There's that other story, and they're both such interesting and amazing stories that we see them as separate stories. But there is a connection between the two, and Mark's going to tell us that the connection between these two stories is not necessarily a happy one. Now, walk with me through the stories and see if you can spot the connection, see if you can learn some of the lessons. I mean, there's some great lessons in these stories individually, but let's see if we can find the connection between the two. So, back in verse 31, just to make sure you get the story, Jesus tells the disciples, man, you've been working so hard, you've been running here and there, you've been so busy, so let's get some rest. Verse 34, but by the time they get to the resting place, the next crowd is already gathered. They saw Jesus and the disciples going off that way, and he said, they don't know where they're going. Now, they think they're going to have a sabbatical, but we're going to go over there and catch them. And when they get out of the boat, my goodness, the crowd has already formed. But the interesting thing is that even though Jesus was the one who said, wow, we're beat, we need to get some rest, he's the one who still has compassion for the crowd. You know, Jesus' heart never wears out. He's always got more compassion for us. Jesus knows that they need to hear the gospel. Jesus knows that there are many there who need to be healed. But meanwhile, verse 36, look at it. Notice the difference. The disciples, though, are ready to turn the lights out and go home. Send them away, they say. And the disciples, we know they were Baptists because they used supper as an excuse. These folks need to go eat, Jesus. And Jesus turns the tables on the disciples. They don't expect this. Verse 37, Jesus tells the disciples, well, if they need to eat, then you feed them. The disciples are fixing to have a throwdown with Jesus. You don't see this in the Gospels too often, but they get fairly straight with Jesus, and they say, there is no way. If we took all the money we had, 200 denarii. Now, by the way, a denarius, you may know this, but a denarius in the New Testament is basically 1 day's wage. So they said if we took the wages that a man would earn in 2/3 of a year, apparently that was close to how much they had in their traveling fund. If we took all of that and bought bread, we couldn't feed this bunch. So you've got kind of a throwdown here between compassion and power in Jesus, and frustration and giving up in the disciples. Well, you know the rest of the story. Jesus blesses the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, he feeds 5,000. And as we're reading this story, we think, great, end of story 1, victory achieved, the deity of Jesus is clearly seen. He is the one who blesses a little small amount of food and 5,000 people are fed. The lesson of compassion is clearly taught to the disciples. They were ready just to run everybody off, but Jesus says, look, you need to remember to take care of people. And we can read that story and go, okay, that's the first story. We're ready for the next story. Now, tell me another story about Jesus, would you? So verse 45. Immediately after the meal, Jesus sends the disciples to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And he goes up on the mountain to pray. Another big lesson there. Don't miss it. Jesus depended on extended times of prayer. And Jesus needed that. If Jesus needed that. Okay, don't miss that. So verse 48 says, from the mountain, up on the mountain, Jesus sees that the disciples are having a hard time. I think this is supernatural vision as much as it is natural vision. So Jesus has been up on that mountain praying. He sees the disciples are out on the Sea of Galilee, and they're having a hard time. The wind is blowing, the waves are breaking over the boat. They're rowing as hard as they can, but they aren't getting very far. So Jesus sets out to help them. Notice verse 48. Don't let that verse throw you. The New American Standard says he intended to pass by them. Now, in our modern English, when we read that, we kind of get the idea that what's happening here is that the disciples are in the boat, they're struggling, and Jesus just kind of walks by on the water. That translation kind of sounds like Jesus was just going to walk by and go, keep rowing, fellas, you'll get there. That's not what that verse means. To pass by them is an idiomatic expression, and it means that Jesus was going to go around and get in front of them so that they could see him and know who their deliverer was. This is passed by them in the same sense of Moses back in the desert. Remember when he said to God, I've just done all I can do. I need something special from you. And God said, there is a place in the rock, a cleft in the rock, and I will put you there in the cleft, and I will cover you with my hand, and I will, what did God say? Pass by you. And then I'll take my hand away and let you see what amount of my glory that you can stand. That's the way that phrase, Jesus intended to pass by them, is used here in this story. So he's getting in front of them so that they can see them. And he speaks to them and he says, don't be afraid. It's me. Verse 51, he gets in the boat. The storm stops. Now, notice what it says. They were utterly astonished. That phrasing means they were confounded to the point of amazement. They were amazed to the point of being confounded. In other words, what we're being told here is that what the disciples said was, wait, you were there, and now you're here, and we were here, and you, water, boat, no boat. That's kind of what the disciples were saying. They were, the modern word is, say it with me, flabbergasted. I'm not sure where that word came from, but it works, doesn't it? That's what the disciples were. They were flabbergasted. And their confusion, their lack of understanding, they're going, we in boat, you on land, how are you now in boat? I don't think they tried to speak like an Indian in a cowboy movie, but that's the way it came out. That confusion is the real connection between these two stories. It's not just that one story happened immediately after the other. There's a dynamic connection as well. They were speechless. They were confused. They were flabbergasted because verse 52 says they had not gained any insight from the incident with the loaves, because their heart was hard. The New Living Translation reads this way: their hearts were too hard to take it in. See, Jesus had just done something very special. He had fed 5,000 people with just 5 pieces of flatbread and 2 small baked fish. And they missed it. They missed it. They, the disciples, the ones who had been with Jesus, the ones who were the closest followers of Jesus, they missed it. Either they weren't paying attention, or they had just decided that they had seen it all before and nothing was going to impress them, or they were still complaining about having to deal with all those people. Either way, we don't know exactly why, but we know that they missed it for one of those reasons. Now, here's the thing, y'all. Because they missed Jesus in the pleasant setting, you go back now, don't let the two stories get separated. Go back to the story of the 5,000. Where did that happen? It says, when Jesus decided to feed the people, what happened? He told them to sit down on the grass in groups of 50 and 100. Now, have you ever sat down on the grass by a lake? Go ahead, give a smile. And just see, the sun is shining, and the birds are chirping, and maybe there's a little breeze, and the water's just kind of lapping up on the shore, and you're sitting on the green grass. It's a good day, isn't it? Yeah. So when we dismiss, we'll all, you can if you want to. Because they missed what Jesus was doing in that pleasant setting, they missed him in the storm when they needed him. They didn't see his power in the bread, and so they weren't even sure who he was out on the dark lake, because they weren't paying attention. because they were too busy thinking about other things, because they had gotten used to what the Son of God was doing. Verse 49 says they thought he might be a ghost. Verse 50 says they were terrified. They didn't recognize their Savior when they were in trouble because they hadn't paid attention to their Savior in the good times. Because they got so comfortable being around Jesus without responding to his message. Because they got used to saying, yeah, that's fine, maybe I'll do something about that later. Because they got complacent, they were completely helpless in the storm. Look at verse 52 one more time. I want to show you something. They miss the power of Jesus because verse 52 says their hearts were hard. That word hard literally means calloused. They missed Jesus because they had gotten calloused. Now, for those of you who have never had one, let me tell you that a callus is an area of thickened skin, a hard place, that forms as a response to repeated friction or pressure. Are you starting to see what a great word this is for the disciples? They'd been around Jesus all this time. They'd seen him do this, they'd seen him do that. They had heard him speak, and they just kind of gotten back where they were just comfortable and said, yeah, you tell him Jesus. They didn't really respond personally, and so it was just like the gospel, the message, the call of Jesus was just, it would rub on them, but they wouldn't respond, and so they began to develop on their hearts a callous. When the gospel message of salvation, when a lost person hears the message of salvation over and over and over, when a saved person hears the call of the Holy Spirit to obedience and discipleship over and over and over, without response, without tenderness of heart, without surrender, they hear the message, but they don't come to Jesus, they don't walk with Jesus, they don't serve Jesus, then their souls build up a thick place of spiritual resistance that we could call callous. Now, it gets worse. Some people actually get proud of their calluses. A guitar player, Brother Steve, I'm going to get you to get up and give witness here, will get proud of the calluses that they get on their fingertips from constant strumming and picking. It's a badge of honor. You see, I did my practice. I spent my time on the strings. I'm proud of my calloused fingers. That means I can really pick a guitar. Rock climbers, I'm told, I certainly don't know, are proud to get calluses on their hands from spending so much time hanging onto a ledge. Weightlifters, I know a little about that, not much, are proud to get calluses on their palms from lots of times on the bar, holding the bar, and their skin gets rough. They're proud of that. And in the worst cases, people who resist the gospel, who resist the invitation of the Holy Spirit, who push back the presence of God in their lives, not only develop spiritual calluses, but actually get proud of their spiritual calluses. Nothing that preacher says is going to move them. I'll tell you what. Mark chapter 6. In just 2 more chapters in the Gospel of Mark. If you go to chapter 8, you don't have to, you can turn there and go and read it. But in just 2 more chapters in the Gospel of Mark, another large crowd is going forward. This time it'll be 4,000 people. And Jesus will again tell the disciples, I don't want to send them away without feeding them. Let me just tell you something. Jesus always wants to take care of his people. Jesus is in some ways like a grandmother. You know, grandmother's just not happy unless somebody's eating, right? And that's the way Jesus is. He always wants to take care of us. And Jesus will again, with another crowd in another place, say, I don't want to send them away without feeding them. And this time the disciples will not be quite as obstinate as they were here in chapter 6, but they will still ask the question, but where will we find enough bread to feed them? Can you really honestly believe they're asking this question? I mean, were they just not awake? Were they just not paying attention? Were their hearts that hard? And of course, if you put all 3 of these stories together, that's exactly the point. So Jesus will ask them, after they say, well, where in the world are we going to get enough bread? And Jesus will ask them, well, how much bread do you have? And this time the answer will be that they have 7 loaves. And Jesus will again tell his disciples, will tell the people to sit down. And Jesus will bless the 7 loaves. And this time, the 4,000 people will be fed. And they will take up 7 baskets of leftovers. 1 for each of the loaves that was initially offered up. The Bible says that later that day, in a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee, there they are in the boat again, the disciples will suddenly realize in the middle of a different conversation that they didn't bring any of the leftover bread with them. They took up 7 baskets for this second feeding, and they didn't bring any, so they've got no lunch, and they get all bent out of shape about it. The Bible says that Jesus, sitting in the boat with the disciples, will look at them and say, seriously? New translation. You're worried about bread? Seriously? And Jesus will ask them a couple of questions, and he will say to them, when I fed the 5,000, how many baskets of leftovers did you have? And they will say 12. And when I fed the 4,000, how many baskets did you have? And they will say 7. And then Jesus will ask them this question. Do you not yet understand? We come to church over and over and over. We have the privilege of literally, I don't think this is too strong a word, literally basking in the presence of God. We hear the Word of God. We sing together to God. We ask God to bless our lives. But we withhold our total obedience and our full heart dedication. And then we wonder why church is not more exciting and why our lives are not more full. Do you not yet understand? If Jesus was standing here physically today, I think that's what he would say. When I picked up, when I fed the 5,000 and you picked up 12 baskets, did you see it happen? Yes. And when we fed the 4,000, you picked up 7 baskets. not yet understand. And then we come in to church. And we say, it's good to be here. We shake each other's hands, we hug each other's necks. But still, we just go out the door and go on about our regular business and wonder why we're not satisfied with life. Do you not yet understand? Would you stand in prayer, please? We stand here in this place Sunday after Sunday, and we say you are good. And there is absolutely no doubt about that. You are good, Father. You're holy. You're righteous. You have given your Son's life for our salvation. You lead us by your Spirit. You call us to love you, to serve you, to walk with you. You invite us to worship and just to surrender our, sometimes you just invite us just to open our hearts in front of you and enjoy your presence. What we fail to understand sometimes, though, that those events are supposed to be stepping stones, not just events that happen that we pay no attention to. Those things are supposed to make a difference in our lives. Would you help us understand, Father, that we're supposed to give ourselves to you? Not for a moment, but as part of the way we live our lives. It's one of the most important lessons we can learn. We never want to be people of whom the Bible might say they took no insight from what God had done in their lives. I can't stress to you this morning, folks, how important it is that we want to be a blessing. So much so, Steve, if you don't mind, I'm going to do something different this morning. I want you to think about this. I hope you will. I hope you'll pray about it. I hope you'll seek God while we're having our time of invitation. I don't want to distract you. I mean, sometimes when you sing, it's easy to concentrate on the words and not really listen to what God's saying in our hearts. So I'm going to ask you just from this week to keep playing this song. You recognize the song. Turn your eyes on Jesus. And instead of singing, I'm just going to ask you to pray and respond. I'll tell you that the altar is open. You need to spend some time with God and make some changes and nail some things down in your life. You come. I'd ask everyone else just to be in an attitude of prayer, pray, listen to what God says, and if you need to spend some time at the altar, come. There's something that you need to share with your church family. You want to rededicate your life. You want your church to pray for you. Come. We'll do that. If there's anyone here that doesn't know Jesus, come. We'll be happy to show you from the Word of God how to be saved. Nothing's more important this morning than your walk with Jesus. So would you seek Him while Miss